The massive auditorium at Galactic University was alive with sounds Jake Morrison had never quite gotten used to. 3 months into his exchange program, he still found himself amazed by the incredible variety of alien species that filled the lecture hall each day. The crystalline students from Zarian made beautiful bell-like sounds whenever they shifted in their seats, their transparent bodies catching and reflecting the soft blue lighting of the room.
Next to them
sat the Vorthok, gas-based beings who needed special environmental suits to maintain their form, their voices creating an odd whistling effect when they spoke. The reptilian Skarn students were perhaps the most expressive, their scales constantly shifting through different colors depending on their emotions. Jake adjusted himself in his reinforced chair, one of only 3 in the entire university designed to handle human bone density and muscle mass. At 6 feet tall and weighing nearly 200 pounds, he was considered a massive creature by galactic standards. Most species averaged around 4 feet in height and weighed less than a human child. The university had to specially order furniture just for him and the 2 other human exchange students on campus. Professor Veltar stood at the front of the room, his forearms moving gracefully as he prepared the day's lesson. The Altarian professor was one of the more respected xenobiologists in the galaxy, known for his comprehensive studies of extreme world conditions. His purple skin had a slight shimmer to it, and his large black eyes could process light spectrums that humans couldn't even imagine. The holographic display came to life above the lecture pit, showing a 3-dimensional star map dotted with different colored points. Each color represented a different classification of world habitability. Green dots marked the standard habitable worlds where most galactic civilizations thrived. Yellow indicated challenging but manageable environments. Orange showed worlds that required significant technological adaptation to survive. Then there were the red dots. Class 12 Deathworlds. Today we will examine the most extreme planetary environments known to support intelligent life, Professor Veltar announced, his voice carrying easily through the amphitheater's acoustics. These are worlds so hostile that the odds of any species evolving to sentience are calculated at less than 1 in 10 billion. Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. The display zoomed in on a small section of the galaxy, highlighting several red dots. Names appeared next to each one as the professor's pointer moved across them. Kethver Prime, where the native species had to live underground to avoid constant meteor bombardment. The Shanine, a world of perpetual volcanic activity where the dominant species had evolved het-resistant shells. Mordok, where the atmosphere was so toxic that breathing required specialized organs that filtered deadly gases. Then the pointer stopped on a familiar blue and green marble. Earth appeared in glowing red text, classified unmistakably as a Class 12 Deathworld. The reaction was immediate. The crystalline students began chiming frantically, a sound Jake had learned indicated extreme surprise or confusion. The Vorthok started whistling rapidly in their environmental suits. She knew meant they were discussing something urgently among themselves. The Skarn student's scales shifted to deep purple, their color for bewilderment. A mantis-like student from the Klaxon system stood up, her forearms waving in agitation. Professor, surely there's been an error in the classification system. How could the humans possibly have survived long enough on such a world to develop space travel, let alone advanced civilization? More voices joined in. A slug-like Malarian asked how humans had overcome the obvious environmental challenges. A bird-like Aviax wanted to know what kind of protective technology early humans must have developed. The questions came faster and faster, creating a cacophony of alien languages that the universal translators struggled to keep up with. Through it all, Jay felt every pair of eyes in the auditorium gradually turning toward him. As the only human in the advanced xenobiology program, he had become accustomed to being something of a curiosity. Other students often asked him questions about human biology, culture, and history, but this felt different. It felt like he was suddenly representing his entire species in front of a room full of beings who couldn't understand how his people had survived their own planet. The weight of their stares was almost physical. Jake rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd picked up as a kid back in Ohio. He could feel sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Another uniquely human trait that fascinated his alien classmates. Professor Veltar raised two of his forearms, calling for quiet. The room gradually settled, though Jake could still hear whispered conversations in a dozen different languages. The professor's large black eyes fixed on Jake with what might have been sympathy. Perhaps our human colleague could provide some insight into this apparent contradiction, the professor suggested gently. Jake slowly stood up, his chair creaking under the shift in weight. At his full height, he towered over most of the other students, another reminder of just how different humans were from the galactic norm. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing slightly in the sudden silence. "Well," he said quietly, his voice carrying a slight Midwest accent that the translators rendered as regional dialect variations for the alien students. "I guess we just got used to it." Professor Veltar's forearms moved across the holographic control panel with practiced efficiency, pulling up detailed readouts of Earth's atmospheric composition. The numbers appeared in glowing text above the lecture hall, and Jake watched as dozens of alien faces processed the information. What happened next was like watching a wave of horror wash over the entire auditorium. The crystalline students from Zarian began making sharp, discordant sounds that Jake had learned meant they were deeply distressed. They're normally beautiful. Chiming became jagged and harsh. The gas-form Vorthok started swirling frantically within their environmental suits, creating small whirlwinds of panic. Even the normally calm reptilian Skarn had their scales shifting rapidly between orange and red, colors that indicated fear and shock. Jake looked at the display and tried to see it through their eyes. To him, the numbers looked perfectly normal. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, traces of other gases. Standard Earth atmosphere. Nothing unusual about it at all. But then he remembered his first week at the university, when he'd learned that most inhabited worlds had oxygen levels between 8 and 12%. Anything above 15% was considered dangerously high. 21% was practically unheard of. 21% oxygen, Jake said, his voice carrying easily through the stunned silence. He could see the horrified faces around him, and he tried to keep his tone casual and conversational. "Yeah, everything burns pretty easily back home. You drop a match wrong, and you can accidentally start a campfire. Lightning strikes during dry seasons start forest fires that can rage for months, sometimes covering areas larger than small countries." A gelatinous blob-like student from the Malarian system began quivering violently, which Jake had learned was their equivalent of stuttering from shock. When it finally managed to speak, its voice came out as a wet, trembling sound that the universal translator rendered as barely controlled panic. "Your gravity readings," it managed to say. "Please tell us those numbers are incorrect." Jake glanced at the display again. 9.8 meters per second squared. It seemed normal to him, but he was starting to understand that his definition of normal was apparently terrifying to everyone else in the room. "Out twice what most of you are used to," Jake said with a casual shrug that made several students flinch. The movement of his shoulders, simple and effortless to him, represented the casual manipulation of forces that would crush most of the beings in the room. "This makes you strong, though. Human kids play sports in gravity that would pin most galactic species to the ground." He paused, watching their expressions grow even more concerned. A bird-like aviax student had its feathers standing completely on end, a clear sign of distress. The mantis-like klaxon were clicking their mandibles rapidly, which meant they were trying to process something that didn't make sense to them. "Oh, and the weather," Jake continued, and he could practically feel the temperature in the room drop as every alien leaned forward with a mixture of fascination and terror. "We get storms that level entire cities. Hurricanes with winds that can throw cars around like toys, spinning for weeks across thousands of miles of ocean before they hit land. Tornadoes that can appear in minutes and carve paths of destruction through anything in their way." The crystalline being's song had become almost painful to listen to, sharp and discordant. When it finally managed to speak, its voice was barely above a whisper. How many humans die from these weather events each year? Jake thought about it for a moment. Back home, Weather-related deaths were considered newsworthy precisely because they were relatively rare. Modern forecasting and emergency preparedness had made most natural disasters manageable, even if they were still dangerous. Not that many anymore, he said, honestly. We got really good at predicting them. Building shelters that can withstand the wind and flooding. Most people just evacuate when something big is coming. He could see this wasn't helping their shock. If anything, the casual way he talked about evacuating entire populations from massive storms seemed to be making things worse. To surf hurricanes for fun, Jake added. The effect was immediate in the mood. The effect was immediate and completely opposite to what he'd intended. The room fell into absolute silence, not the comfortable quiet of students paying attention, the kind of dead silence that happens when people are too shocked to even breathe properly. Jake realized he'd probably made a mistake mentioning hurricane surfing. To him, it was just a funny family story about his grandfather's questionable hobby choices. But two beings whose worlds experienced nothing more severe than light rain showers, the idea of intentionally seeking out the most dangerous weather phenomena on Earth for entertainment was apparently beyond comprehension. Professor, Veltar cleared his throat nervously, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the absolute quiet of the lecture hall. His forearms fidgeted with the controls, and Jake could see that even the professor, despite his academic interest in extreme worlds, was having trouble processing what he was hearing. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft humming of the environmental systems and the occasional involuntary sound from a student too shocked to maintain complete quiet. Jake found himself wondering if he should have been more careful about how he explained things. But honestly, how else could you describe Earth? It was what it was. He looked around the room at all the alien faces, staring at him with mixtures of horror, fascination, and something that might have been a new kind of respect. They were beginning to understand that humans weren't just another species that happened to achieve space travel. They were something else entirely. Jake could see that his explanation of Earth's atmosphere and weather had left the alien students in a state of shock. But he was just getting started. The numbers on the holographic display were impressive, sure, but they only told part of the story. The real horror of Earth wasn't in the environmental data or the gravity readings. It was in the life that had evolved to thrive in such an impossible place. But the real challenge, Jake continued, his voice gaining confidence as he warmed to his topic, isn't the planet trying to kill us? It's everything living on it. As if summoned by his words, Emily Watson slipped quietly into the back of the lecture hall. Jake felt a wave of relief seeing her familiar face. Emily was the only other human in the advanced xenobiology program, and having her there made him feel less like a specimen under examination. She caught his eye and gave him an encouraging nod, settling into one of the few human-sized seats. Near the back entrance, Jake turned back to the sea of alien faces, all focused on him with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly unnerving. The crystalline students had stopped their discordant chiming and were perfectly still, their transparent bodies reflecting the holographic display in fractured rainbows. The Vorthok had calmed their swirling within their environmental suits, though Jake could see small eddies of movement that suggested they were still agitated. See, Earth didn't just try to crush us with gravity or burn us with oxygen, Jake explained, gesturing with his hands in a way that made several students lean back slightly. It created millions of species specifically designed to hunt us, poison us, or parasitize us. We share our world with creatures that see humans as nothing more than their next meal or their ideal breeding ground. A tentacled student from the Cephalon system made a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve, which Jake had learned was their way of expressing extreme surprise or disbelief. Its translucent tentacles writhed nervously as it spoke. But surely your immune systems must be incredibly advanced to handle such threats. Dum-da. Jake scratched his head, trying to figure out how to explain the beautiful disaster that was human biology. Yeah, our immune systems are pretty amazing. We've got white blood cells that patrol our bodies like tiny soldiers hunting down invaders. But here's where it gets really weird. He paused, looking around the room at the expectant faces. Even Professor Veltar had leaned forward, his forearms folded in front of him as he listened intently. We've got viruses so small you need machines to see them, and they reprogram our cells to make more viruses. Basically, they hack our own biology and turn us into virus factories. Some bacteria can eat our flesh. Others produce toxins that shut down our nervous systems. And we're constantly fighting a war inside our own bodies against these microscopic invaders. The gelatinous Malarian student began quivering again, its blob-like form rippling with what Jake recognized as their expression of horror. But the really fun part, Jake continued with a grin that seemed to make everyone in the room deeply uncomfortable, is that sometimes our immune system gets confused and attacks our own bodies. We call those autoimmune diseases. Our own defense systems can destroy our joints, our organs, even our brain tissue, because they think we're the enemy. Emily stepped forward from the back of the room, and Jake felt grateful for the backup. She had a way of explaining things that somehow made the impossible sound almost reasonable. "And don't get me started on cancer," Emily said, her voice carrying easily through the acoustics of the lecture hall. "That's when our own cells decide to ignore all the rules and just multiply uncontrollably, basically trying to eat us from the inside out." The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the soft humming of the environmental systems that kept the various alien species comfortable in the shared atmosphere of the lecture hall. Emily smiled, which seemed to disturb the alien students even more. Human facial expressions, Jake had learned, often looked predatory to species that had evolved without prominent canine teeth. "But my favorite part," Emily continued, "is that we voluntarily consume toxins for pleasure. Coffee contains enough caffeine to kill smaller species. A single cup of human coffee would put most of you in the hospital. Alcohol is literally poison that we drink to relax. It damages our liver, our brain, and our nervous system, and we consider it a fun social activity." A bird-like aviac student ruffled its feathers in distress. "Why would you voluntarily poison yourselves?" "Oh, it gets better," Emily said, clearly enjoying the shocked expressions around the room. "Peppers evolved capsaicin specifically to stop mammals from eating them. It's a chemical weapon designed to cause pain and inflammation, so naturally, humans put it on everything. We have competitive eating contests to see who can consume the most painful peppers. We've bred them to be even more toxic than they naturally occur." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, we literally selectively bred plants to be better at hurting us, and then we eat them for fun. Some peppers are so dangerous they require protective equipment to handle safely." The mantis-like klaxon student clicked its mandibles rapidly. The sound that the universal translator indicated was confused, stuttering, but ... "But how do you survive ingesting such toxins?" "Practice," Emily said with a shrug that made her look casual and terrifying at the same time. "Humans build tolerance to almost everything. Poisons, radiation, extreme temperatures, physical trauma. We adapt." The room had fallen into that same dead silence Jake was getting used to. He could see the aliens trying to process what they were hearing, their various forms of expression showing different stages of disbelief and horror. Finally, a small mouse-like creature from a species Jake didn't recognize spoke up its voice. So quiet, it was barely audible even in the perfect acoustics of the lecture hall. "How are you still alive?" Jake and Emily exchanged a look across the lecture hall, and Jake could see the same thought reflected in her eyes. This was always the moment when other species went from thinking humans were lucky survivors to realizing they were something else entirely. The question hanging in the air wasn't really about how humans were still alive. It was about how they had become what they were. "We adapted," Jake said simply, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they didn't capture the full scope of what human adaptation actually meant. Earth kept trying to kill us in every way imaginable, so we got tougher. It's not just individually, but as a species. He could see the alien students leaning forward, their various forms of attention focused completely on him. The crystalline beings had gone perfectly still, their chiming completely silenced. The gas form Vorthok had stopped their nervous swirling. Even Professor Veltar had set down his datapad and was listening with the kind of focused attention that Jake usually only saw during the most important lectures. "Take hunting, for example," Jake continued. "Most predators on Earth are faster than humans, stronger than humans, have better senses than humans. So how did we become the dominant species? We developed persistence hunting. Basically, we'd chase our prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. A slug-like Malarian student rippled with confusion. But surely faster predators would catch prey more efficiently. Emily stepped closer to the center of the room, her movement casual but purposeful. Jake had noticed that Emily had a talent for making the most incredible things sound perfectly reasonable. "That's the thing," she said. "Humans can outrun horses. Over long distances? Not fast, but we literally never stop. Our prey might be faster in a sprint, but we can maintain a steady pace for hours, sometimes days. We sweat to cool ourselves down, which most mammals can't do effectively. So while our prey is overheating and desperately looking for shade and water, we just keep coming." Jake nodded, warming to the explanation. "Picture this. You're a deer, and you see this relatively slow, hairless ape following you. Run away. Easily. But then, an hour later, it's still there. You run again. 2 hours later, it's still following you. You're exhausted, overheated, desperate for water, and this thing just keeps walking toward you at the same steady pace, not even breathing. Hard." The bird-like aviax student ruffled its feathers nervously. "That sounds ... terrifying." "It was probably the most terrifying thing on Earth for a long time," Emily agreed cheerfully. "But that's just the beginning. Watch this." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a jagged white scar that ran from her wrist almost to her elbow. The alien students made various sounds of distress at the sight of it. Scars were rare among most galactic species, since their medical technology could heal most wounds without leaving marks. And their biology was generally too fragile to survive the kind of trauma that would cause permanent scarring. "I got this falling off my bike when I was 7, Emily said conversationally. "It fell down a hill, landed on some broken glass, cut myself open pretty bad. Lost a lot of blood. Needed surgery to repair the damage." The mantis-like klaxon student clicked its mandibles anxiously. Such an injury would be fatal to most juveniles of any species. "Right, but here's the thing," Emily continued, flexing her arm to show that it worked perfectly despite the obvious trauma it had sustained. "On most worlds, a wound like this would kill a child. For human kids, call it character building. My parents were worried, sure, but they weren't surprised. Human children are basically indestructible compared to most species." Jake picked up the thread, gesturing to his own body. "Our bones are hollow tubes filled with marrow that can completely heal after breaking. Not just heal enough to function, but actually become stronger than they were before. We can survive losing entire limbs and still live normal lives. People lose fingers, toes, even arms and legs, and just adapt to working without them." A tentacled cephalon made that steam hissing sound again. "Your biology seems designed for trauma recovery." "'Cause it is," Emily said matter-of-factly. "We can survive losing up to 40% of our blood. We can function with only one lung, one kidney, half our liver. People have survived having parts of their brain removed, who've learned to eat things that would poison other species, developed immunity to diseases that would wipe out entire populations of other worlds." Jake gestured toward the holographic display that still showed Earth's environmental data. "We live in climates from frozen tundra, where the air itself can freeze your lungs, to scorching deserts where the ground is hot enough to cook food. We've built cities and swamps full of disease-carrying insects on the slopes of active volcanoes, in areas that flood regularly, in places where the ground shakes so violently it can level buildings." One of the reptilian Scarn students had its scales, shifting rapidly between different colors, cycling through what Jake recognized as their entire emotional spectrum. Finally, it settled on deep purple, which meant profound confusion. "I don't understand," it said, its voice carrying a subtle hissing quality that the universal translator rendered as bewilderment. "If your world was so hostile, why didn't your species leave it behind once you developed space travel? Why do humans still choose to live on Earth?" Jake felt a grin spreading across his face. This was the question that got to the heart of what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. Every other intelligent race they'd encountered had developed space travel at least partly as an escape from the limitations of their home worlds. They spread across the galaxy looking for better places to live, easier conditions, more comfortable environments. Humans had developed space travel and then used it to find new challenges, Because we realized something important, Jake said, his voice carrying a note of pride that made several alien students shift nervously in their seats. Earth wasn't trying to destroy us. It was training us. Every impossible challenge, every deadly predator, every natural disaster, every disease and poison and environmental extreme was teaching us something valuable. Emily nodded, her expression growing more serious. Other species look at problems and try to find ways around them. Humans look at problems and figure out how to go through them. Earth taught us that there's no challenge too big, no environment too hostile, no obstacle too dangerous. There's always a way to adapt, to overcome, to turn the thing that's trying, to kill you into something that makes you stronger. The lecture hall had fallen into that profound silence again, but this time it felt different. Not the silence of shock or horror, but the silence of beings trying to process a completely new way of understanding survival and adaptation. Jake looked around at all the alien faces staring at him, and he realized they were beginning to understand. Something that would probably change how they thought about humans forever? Professor Veltar had been teaching xenobiology for over 3 decades. But Jake could see that something fundamental was shifting in the professor's understanding. His forearms moved restlessly as he processed what he'd heard, and his large, black eyes held an intensity that Jake had never seen before. The professor's academic curiosity was finally overcoming the shock that had kept him quiet through most of Jake's explanation. "Training you for what?" Professor Veltar asked, leaning forward in his chair. The question carried the weight of genuine scientific inquiry, but also something deeper. It was the kind of question that could reshape entire fields of study. Emily stepped to the center of the room, her movement confident and purposeful. Jake watched as she positioned herself where every student could see her clearly, and he realized that she had been thinking about this moment for a long time. This wasn't just an impromptu explanation. This was Emily sharing something she had been preparing to say since the day she first left Earth. "For everything," she said, and her voice carried a conviction that seemed to resonate through the entire lecture hall. "Earth taught us that the universe doesn't owe us survival, doesn't owe us comfort or safety or easy answers. If we wanted those things, we had to earn them." Jake could see the alien students processing this concept, their various expressions showing different levels of comprehension and discomfort. Most galactic civilizations had evolved on worlds that, while challenging, had ultimately supported their development. The idea of a world that actively tested its inhabitants was foreign to them. "It taught us to work together," Emily continued, "because no human survives alone on a death world. When your environment is constantly trying to kill you, cooperation isn't just helpful, it's essential. Humans who couldn't work with others didn't live long enough to pass on their genes." A gelatinous Malarian student rippled nervously. "But surely individual strength must also be important." "It is," Jake said, stepping forward to join Emily in the center of the room. "But Earth taught us something that most species never learn. Individual strength without cooperation is just elaborate suicide. The strongest human who tries to survive alone will be killed by the first pack of wolves, or the first broken bone, or the first winter storm." Emily nodded, her expression growing more animated as she warmed to the topic. But cooperation was just the beginning. Earth taught us to innovate, because every challenge became a puzzle that needed solving. Fire burns down our shelters. Learn to control fire and use it to keep warm. Cook food, forge tools. Predators hunt us. Figure out how to make them hunt for us instead. Jake could see the alien students exchanging glances, their various forms of communication creating a subdued buzz of discussion throughout the lecture hall. The crystalline beings were beginning to chime again, but softly, almost musically. The Vorthok were creating gentle currents within their environmental suits. Even the normally stoic Skarn had their scales shifting through thoughtful patterns of blue and green. When other species encounter a problem, Jake continued building on Emily's explanation. They often look for ways to avoid it, find a safer place, develop technology to protect against it, or just accept it as a limitation they have to live with. When humans encounter a problem, we ask, how do we make this work for us instead? He gestured toward the holographic display that still showed Earth's environmental data. Radiation will kill us. We study it until we can use it to cure cancer and power our cities. Fire burns our homes. We learn to control it so precisely that we can forge metals, power engines, and cook food. Predators hunt us. We domesticate them and make them our partners in hunting other predators. Emily's voice grew stronger, more passionate as she continued. Diseases try to kill us. We learn how they work and turn them into vaccines that make us immune. Poison kills us. We use it in tiny doses to create medicines that save lives. Weather destroys our buildings. We study the patterns and build structures that can withstand anything nature throws at them. Jake watched as the concept began to sink in among the alien students. He could see the moment when they stopped thinking of humans as lucky survivors and started understanding them as something entirely different. You asked how we survived a Deathworld, Emily said, her voice carrying to every corner of the lecture hall. We didn't just survive it. We became it. Every human carries the spirit of Earth inside them. Resilient, adaptable, and absolutely refusing to quit, no matter what the universe throws at us. The auditorium fell into complete silence. Shocked silence of earlier, but something deeper and more profound. Students who had been chattering and moving restlessly just an hour ago now sat perfectly still, processing the implications of what they had heard. Jake could see the wheels turning in dozens of alien minds. They were beginning to understand why humans had spread so quickly through the galaxy once they achieved space travel. Why human colonies thrived in environments that other species considered uninhabitable. Why humans seemed to approach every new challenge with enthusiasm rather than fear. Finally, one of the crystalline students began to sing. The sound was different from their earlier chiming, softer, more melodic, almost reverent. Jake had learned that this particular tone was reserved for moments of deep respect or wonder. Your world created apex survivors, the crystalline being sang, its voice creating harmonics that seemed to resonate through the bones of every creature in the room. Jake nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that recognition. And then it taught us the most important lesson of all. Survival isn't about being the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced. It's about never giving up, helping each other, and turning every single attempt to destroy you into something that makes you stronger. Emily stepped forward one final time, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the perfect acoustics of the lecture hall. Earth didn't try to kill us, she said, and Jake could hear the profound affection in her voice when she spoke of their home world. It tried to teach us, and we learned. We learned that there's no challenge too great, no environment too hostile, no problem too complex. There's always a way forward, if you're willing to adapt, to cooperate, and to never ever give up. Silence that followed felt like a moment of recognition, as if the entire room was acknowledging something fundamental about what it meant to be human. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.